Welcome back to another episode of NextGenDDS. As always, co-host Wes Lyon and chair number 2 co-host Dr. Scott Menaker. Scott, welcome back.
Hey, Wes, great. Always fun to be here talking about great topics that we're going to help our next generation of dentists out there.
Yeah, today, distractions and disruptions. This is going to be one of my favorite episodes, I think.
Yeah, it's you can look at it, the world in a lot of different ways, and I as I talk to dental students around the country and at different meetings and kind of locally in some of the schools in the area, I used to have a slide up there that talked about disruptions, and we'll talk about some of those, and then we're going to go to the distraction part, because today's world, there's so many different distractions that are taking us away from kind of where you need to be focused. But the disruptions are things, sometimes some of those that are things you just can't predict. I know for me, my first one was 1986 when the AIDS thing popped up. Okay, so for those of you that don't know, 1986 was the year that a dentist had given one of his patients AIDS. Now, they came to find out that he was intentionally doing some things that were pretty bad. But we all of a sudden went from, if you can believe this, not wearing gloves to wearing gloves. And all of a sudden, we're like, what do you mean? We're going to wear gloves? And where do we get them from? And do you wash gloves? Do you not wash gloves? How often can you use them? There were people showing up in tractor trailers full of gloves that somebody had found that probably were worse than not wearing gloves. But, that was the first kind of a disruption. And then you get into, well, there was the thing, these computers, we started becoming computerized. And then there were digital x-rays, and that was way before there was a chart, and there were intraoral cameras, and then we got, the dot-com bubble, which was a huge financial one in the late 1990s. And then we had the mortgage bust in 2008 that, just destroyed a lot of our retirement plans. It destroyed a lot of local banks here in Charlotte, disappeared. COVID. I mean, there's all these things that just end up happening. And sometimes having your practice in a place that you're kind of prepared. You don't know that all of this stuff is going to happen. We didn't know that COVID was going to shut our practice down for almost 2 months. But we were prepared to kind of get through that. And when we came out of it, it was gangbusters. But you had to have yourself set up. So these disruptions are going to come. I like to think they come every 8 to 10 years. We're now in what's AI going to do to us? I don't know. But is it going to be good? Maybe. Is it going to be bad? Just as likely. But how you're prepared mentally and your practice is prepared will really determine what happens in, your success long term.
Yeah, I like to call this kind of learning to float. Oftentimes as a business owner, you just kind of feel like you're floating through life. And everybody else is worried about things, doing, what are you going to do about X, Y, and Z? And you just kind of learn to naturally prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And that way, the disruption is going to come. Right.
There will be. That's right.
You don't know what it's going to be, but you know it's going to come. So mentally prepare yourself and financially prepare yourself, for something's going to go wrong.
The biggest key, maybe the word that I would say is, and I learned this from the founder, one of the founders of our firm, Charles Blair, is get your systems in order. So if you're doing things haphazard and you're just flying along, and when that disruption comes, it's going to be like a wrecking ball. I want it to be like, somebody just kind of broke my door, not they destroyed my house.
Right.
And I think having systems in place, much like Russ, you and your team have, the same thing in the dental practice is you got to have a system that says, here's how we're going to do things. And it's like I had systems in place that, God forbid something happened to me when I was practicing solo. If something happened to me, I either became disabled or potentially I died. I had a written system that said, here's what my spouse or here's what my office manager was going to do to help protect this disruption of epic proportions.
Now, let's talk about the disruptions are going to happen. You're just going to have to live with that. It's funny. As a business owner, the first one or two, they kind of catch you off guard and you freak out. I think by about the time number 3 comes, and I know this is my own wife, I kind of came in and, she knew something had gone horribly wrong. And she's like, what are we going to do? I was like, it's fine. She's like, what? I'm laughing. And she's like, what do you mean it's fine? I'm like, I've dealt with worse. Like, the sun's going to come up tomorrow. It's all going to be okay. The first 1 or 2 kind of hit you like a brick. But then if you do prepare well and you just know they're going to come, they don't emotionally stress you out. But a lot of times, especially dentists, kind of do things that get them in situations which they can't afford a disruption. And that's what we really want to avoid is, how do you make sure that you can handle a disruption and you're not going to, lose your tail on it. It's not going to be some big thing. So, Scott, before the episode, a couple funny ones we were talking about is, one is, hey, do you need every newest, latest, and greatest piece of equipment? Is your practice straddled with debt you can't afford unless you keep your top line revenue 100% where it is? Can you afford to go to 80% of your revenue? If you can't afford to go to 80% of your revenue over 6 months, yikes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yikes. Right. If you put all your eggs in one basket, and some people do that, and I've seen practices that were either high-end implants and prosthetics, and I had one doctor who was doing a lot of business with the VA. Well, the VA stopped referring patients to him for these big cases that he was doing, and his revenues decreased 50%. And he's like, what happened? And I mean, there's we can probably go through and spend the next hour and a half giving thousands of examples of these where yes, you want to have a skill set, but you want to be able to weather some of these storms that are going to happen. Listen, when COVID came and we were kind of mandated to close for 7 weeks, there wasn't much you could do. Except we had plenty of money in the bank. We assisted our staff with trying to get unemployment. We hunkered down on the things that we could do. I owned the building. I stopped paying myself rent. I mean, I didn't have a mortgage at that point. There were things that I was willing to forego in order to just bring it in. Yeah, I remember back in 2008 when the banking crisis hit. I mean, it's devastating. In Charlotte, which was we had Bank of America, Wachovia at the time, which is no longer exists. Right. It's now part of Wells Fargo. but that whole bank literally disappeared in a matter of a week, and it affected our patient base. It affected all of those things. But I saw a picture, and it was basically a ship that was out at sea, and it said, when the storm comes, be sure you're prepared to hunker down. And so I literally showed that picture to my staff, and I said, we're going to hunker down. We're not closing. We're going to keep doing what we're doing. We're going to have a change. We're going to have to pivot to a degree, but we're not going to be like going gangbusters, because that just wasn't what was happening in the environment because of that disruption. And we managed to we didn't, we were still providing all the services, but we just were more in tune to what was happening around us. We knew it wasn't going to last forever, but it was pretty dramatic in our environment. It would be like if you're in a smaller town and let's say the factory closes. What are you going to do?
Yeah, so no, your big keys to this stuff's going to happen. You can't go into practice think that it's not. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. Hopefully, you make it forever and nothing happens. However, I don't know anyone that's ran a business. Every friend I have, doesn't matter what business they're in, we all have some horror story about like, almost didn't make the payroll that month or whatever it may be. Everyone's got this story. So you just want to prepare for the fact it's going to come. So not overspending, not over leveraging yourself is probably key. Because, we were laughing about it's the new equipment, we can't tell you how many dentists, the salesperson comes around and they take loans, and then you talk to them 5 years later and they got like 8 pieces of equipment that, oh yeah, that's brand new. We never used it.
We used to always joke that dentists had more useless equipment and materials in their practices, because we'd go to a meeting and I'm not sure if we talked about asking the question why, but we'll maybe come back to another episode on that. But dentists will go to a meeting and the guy, there's a lecture up there and says, this is the bonding resin that I use and this is the material. And everybody used to flood the floor and buy it. Even if you were happy with what you were using, or it was no problem, you were having great success and it was working for you, people and so we would have, shelves full of stuff that could probably open up another dental office in a way. And then you go to, technology. And so, today, you need to have a scanner probably, and your office needs to be fully digitized. Can you do it without it? Probably, but probably not very well. But
Now let's use this one as an example, because what we're talking about in order to avoid this is don't start buying things, doing things until you understand what is the end goal, right? Where do I want my practice to be? So in this example, I bought a practice. Okay, I need to turn the practice digital, right? So let's say, does 12 months seem like a decent time frame to take a practice off paper into fully digital? Maybe longer?
Probably going to take long to do it right.
To do it right.
It's probably going to take longer.
So let's just say, okay, it's going to be 18 or 24 months. So you're going to start with, in 24 months, we want this to be 100% digital. Then we're going to figure out all the steps we need to take, what we need to buy. We don't do it in such a way that some equipment rep comes by, has got a scanner. We know we want to be digital, so we buy the scanner. And then 3 months later, we figure out we bought the wrong scanner, right? Those are the type of mistakes people make, where they go buy things, do things, make changes in their practice when they don't fully think through what the end goal or where I want to be.
And I think your point is spot on, Wes, which is, so what's a disruption that's going to occur between today and 24 months? Because your staff is going to be looking at you going, I don't think so. And then your IT person's going to go, okay, it's going to cost you $60,000 to buy all this stuff, and then I've got to wire it and hook it all up. Oh, wait a minute. You got to get trained on this software. What? And your systems are going to change. And you have to, at the end of my career, we were, my practice, my partner and I, we sold to a DSO, a really nice small boutique group. But a year into it, their software that they use to monitor the financial success of every practice, I had the one software that didn't jive with it. So everything they needed to get, we had to do manually. And finally, after a year, they said, no way, we're changing your software. Well, my practice had been on this software for over 20 years. Was it perfect? No software is, but it was ours and we knew it. Well, we ended up they came in, their IT people came in, and they had to upgrade probably half of our workstations. They had to put in a new server. They had to rewire the whole practice so that it was going to jive so that they could actually monitor things well. And then we had to figure out how many days we're going to be closed to train everybody. So this was not just, oh, we're going digital. We were changing X-ray sensors as well as changing our whole software. And even and we had a pretty progressive practice, we were already digitized. But changing the software, it took 6 months to get it right. And was it good? Probably. We might argue that we like the old software better, but it just wasn't, it needed to change.
No, these are all great points. That's a great story to it, because if you don't think everything through, you're going to pay twice, right? So if you're going to make a big investment into your practice, you need to just pay once, because what can go wrong? Well, we buy a bunch of scanners. We're on loan here for them. We need to get digital. We find out that, oh, shoot, the systems aren't going to integrate. So we need different scanners. And now all of a sudden we're $500,000 into a $200,000 project.
That's right.
And '08 happens.
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah.
And now where are we?
And I don't think the banks might be a tiny bit lenient, but they're not going to let you get out of those payments.
No.
And you're accruing interest on that loan.
So now you're in trouble.
Yeah, it is. And there are, I ended up back in 2005, almost 20 years ago, ended up becoming a CEREC doctor. And CEREC was one of the only scanners out there. And the system, and I spent a year really redefining how we were going to do this so that I didn't lose money. And I wrote out a protocol, and I had a system, and I trained my staff, and it was still disruptive. It was a disruption to how we scheduled patients, how we did crowns, how long the appointment was initially going to take. Fast forward 20 years, it was the greatest thing that I ever did. It didn't take that long. Probably 2 years later, or maybe 5 years later, when they got the third upgrade to the hardware that cost me more money, it finally was really where it needed to be. But I was willing to go. I knew going in that disruption was going to be good. But I had it all mapped out. But I knew, to your point, I knew the end game. I always like to say, start at the end. What is the end going to look like? And I'll get doctors now looking to buy a practice, and they're going to go, I want to buy this practice. It's paper charts and everything. And within 6 months, I'm going to be digital. And I go, 6 months from now, you just want to make sure you're paying the bank back the principal on the, and the interest on the loan. Once you get to 6 months and you've figured out that system, now you can go start talking. But if you're going to go digital day one with all of this stuff, you're asking for some real failure.
And now you're going to have to hire a new staff.
Potentially, right. And you may need to hire a new staff anyway, but don't do that day one.
You didn't think the whole thing through.
Right. I always talk about, said, listen, you don't want to go change staff the first day. Maybe they're not good, but they're keeping this practice. So if this practice is producing $800,000 and collecting $800,000, you want to keep it at that level. If you keep it at that level, we've run the numbers, the banks run the numbers, you're going to be okay. Your goal is to take it from 800 to 1.2, 1.4, because a lot of that's going to be profit. But you don't do that. You're not going to do that day one.
No, you've got to expect the unexpected. So you go try to make the practice digital day one, but you don't expect any of the staff members to leave. Now, all of a sudden, they're all bordering up on retirement age, and you are changing everything about their job. Now, all of a sudden, you're going digital. You don't have a staff. You're trying to hire, and God forbid, 2008 happens, and now you are in trouble, right? If you go buy a practice, you keep the staff the same for 6 months, and '08 happens, it's not going to be fun, but you're probably going to survive it, right? You're not going to survive everything clashing in on you at once, but you'll survive enough of them. So just think carefully before you do it.
So we've talked about some of the disruptions you don't know. We're now talking about one that you planned for. And you just got to make sure you have a really good plan.
Yeah. And then the other piece of that, we've talked about, in order to survive disruptions, keep your practice in good order. Don't do too many things at once. Don't take too much leverage on it. Also, just quick aside, we were joking about is kind of joking is don't do stupid things on the personal side. You can stretch yourself on the practice. You can also stretch yourself on the personal side. So second homes are usually the one that gets dentists in trouble. You don't need the beach house at 35 years old. And if you're going to make a dumb purchase, because we all are, right? If we all lived in the bare minimum, we're going to make dumb purchases. The first thing is admit it's a stupid purchase. It's okay. It's okay to make it. We're not telling you not to do it because it's a stupid financial decision, but start with it being a stupid financial decision and then just see, can I really afford it, right? Because all of a sudden, 08 happens and you were barely making enough money. You weren't saving much, but now you own a second home and you were counting on rental income. So now your practice goes down and your rental income goes down. And now you got to pay the mortgage here, the bank loan here, the mortgage at home. I mean, you're in
it
trouble.
wasn't like there was somebody else producing money to making money to help pay the bills. You just got to go do that. So we're now talking a little bit of the financial disruptions that can occur, and again, being really careful that you're not over leveraging yourself. My wife and I, at the end of my career, we ended up. I'm now 65 years old. 3 years ago, we built a house up at the mountain. My wife looked at me at one point and, there's money kind of going out the door, and it was more than what was advertised because the lumber prices, you want to talk about disruption, lumber prices went up 5 times what they were in the middle of our build. Do you think that the builder went, hey, listen, we can stop building the house? No, that's not a good idea. So he kept building, and he said, oh, by the way, your overage on that now is a big number. And so we got done, and we're in the house, and it is wonderful. It's a great place. But we knew going in, and my wife looked at me one day and she said, so was this a good financial decision? And I just laughed, and kind of what Wes is saying. I looked at her and I said, this is the dumbest thing I've ever done. We were not going to rent it. So this is all on me. This was all coming out of cash flow, or in this case, I didn't pay for it up front. I got a nice, cheap 3% bank loan. So I'm earning money in my retirement account and all the other stuff that's helping to pay for it. But I didn't have to come up with the cash to pay for this. And I wasn't dependent on rental income to pay for it. And I wasn't, we knew going in, this was our dumb one, but we were excited and happy about it. So it was a good decision. Just financially, I could have rented as many houses and never spent this much money.
Yeah, it's okay to do dumb things financially. Not everything's a good financial decision that's going to make you happy. Just don't over leverage yourself personally or in the practice. Because, if you look at it and you go, okay, if '08 happened, would we be bankrupt because of this house? And the answer is no. Great. Have some fun, live your life. It's funny. We get doctors come in here. They've saved every single dollar ever in their life, and they have way too much money. And I'm sitting there spending 3 hours with them. They're expecting me to tell them to save more and do this. And I'm sitting there for 3 hours telling them to do something dumb.
Spend.
What's going to make you happy? I'm like, is it a Porsche, a Ferrari, a second home? What are we going to do stupid today? So we're not trying to encourage you not to do stupid things. Just time and a place to make sure you can afford it.
And as we're talking to our next generation of dentists, you're either in school now, listening, thinking about the future. You've been out, 2 to 5 years. You're thinking about it. I mean, that's the biggest disruption. And you've gone from a school environment to a work, and you're trying to figure out, what's the rest of this look like? And, we've talked about that brand and how you start setting yourself down the path. But there's lots of disruptions that are coming. And they're, you'll learn from those. You got to learn to pivot and set yourself up for success.
Let's talk about the ones that are here, and those are the distractions.
So the biggest one, today, and again, this is my crazy one, is that digital phone in our pocket is probably the biggest one that there is, because all of a sudden you're connected. What drives me crazy, we go out to dinner and the waiter is literally taking our order, turning and pulling their phone out, and I'm like, what just happened? Or you just look around. I mean, I used to love going to the dental meetings, and literally nobody's paying attention to the speaker. Everybody is so distracted by, in this case, I'll say this stupid crap, TikTok and Instagram, and who posted something on Facebook. I mean, I'm not opposed to some of that stuff, but we're distracted by those things, and we just don't start paying attention to really the important stuff. Where are the things that are, they're going to make a difference? I'll just talk like. And you can take any business. So like take an athletic, a country club. Lately it's like everybody's into, we got to be into personal training, and we got to have a chiropractor on staff, and da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I said, what makes us think that we're going to do that better than somebody else? Are we getting distracted by all the noise that's out there? And we're not focusing on where we're going to be. And the word you used earlier, Wes, as we were talking, is, where am I going to have the most impact? And if we're distracted, by all of this, the clutter and the this and the that, and we're gonna miss the boat.
Yeah, your biggest distractions, I think, going to be as a young doctor are what other people are doing financially, and I fight with my wife over this one, because I sit there. I'm not the world's most successful person, but I'd say in my world, most people my age do not own a business. So I kind of sit there and she'll X, Y, and Z or so and so has this, and I'm just kind of sitting there like I don't care, and I just don't say anything back. She's like, what I'm like, I just don't care. And she's like, what? I'm like,
Yeah, what's important is what
literally don't care. Like, I've got a business to run. I've got a daughter. We've.
You got a nice
I
house.
barely get any time to myself, and you want me to care about somebody else? I'm like, this I don't care for I just don't care about their personal life to that extent. And, I don't need to, be at the country club. I actually had a cheap country club member, so I dropped it. We were never there. I was like, it's just a distraction. But as a practice owner, and then when you start throwing kids in the mix, you're basically, I use the term, you're going to float through life. Like, my wife warns everybody. She's, like, hey, if you text my husband, he doesn't answer, don't take it personally. He has like 1,000 unread text messages. And it's just, look, I probably looked and like, was it really important? And then I always go, if it's that important, they'll call me. I'm like, that's the reality.
Yeah. Well, it is. It's like people's phones are blowing up, and they're doing all this stuff. It's interesting. My mom is almost 90 years old. She just moved into a kind of an independent living, beautiful place, but she got rid of her home phone number, and so now she's got her cell phone, and she's. I'm not sure she's really adept at it other than, but she's, wait, it's ringing. Wait. I go, we're having dinner. It'll wait. Just let it be. And she's getting distracted by she's now getting distracted by things that are just not that important. And we had a deal with my kids as they were growing up. My oldest is now 35. When we sat at the table, your phones were not out. I understand the value of phones. Again, we could not function today. That's just where the world has gone. But the rule, if you had your phone out, I took it. Or I would just go to the Verizon account and I would turn it off.
I love that one.
I did that when my kids were in college. I said, if the only time you called me is for money, I'm going to show you the problem that you have. And so I remember one of my sons in particular was just, he didn't return my call. And I wrote back, call me or else. And about 20 minutes later, I said, your phone is going off. And I just went and turned his phone off. And it's amazing. When I turned it back on about 2 days later, I said, call me. How long do you think it took him to call me?
Oh, 2 minutes?
Not that long. And I just said, we're going to have a relationship, but we're not going to be distracted by all the crap that's out there. And
yeah, the problem with getting distracted, it's my wife does this and it drives me up a wall is, oh, so-and-so took this vacation or so-and-so did this and we got to do it. And as we talked about in our branding episode, you need to be at the chamber meeting or whatever, your priorities need to be somewhere else. And we're living in a society in which a lot of the people around you, they're going to be concerned with the distractions and you're going to want to be concerned there too. You've got to shut it off and you've just got to move on and go to these places. And something I've noticed that I really like though is now a lot of my actual friends, right? Not necessarily my wife's, but my actual friends are also people that don't deal with the distractions, right? I met them at these places and we concentrate on, hey, we got to do this. We got to build the business. You start to make, I find them a little bit more meaningful connections. But if you let the distractions drive you down, you're never going to be able to build the practice you want. You're never going to have it. You've got to make a lot of sacrifice. But you've got to sacrifice in the places that don't matter. And that's the distractions in my mind. Yeah. You don't have to care about the Instagram. You don't have to care about the vacations. You don't care about all this other stuff. So-and-so got a new SUV or so. none of that matters. Just focus on what you can control, on what actually matters, and your life will get meaningfully better and you'll be able to build that practice. But, if you're concerned about hitting the tea time every Friday at noon, yikes.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. It sounds great. And at some point that'll all come. As you were just talking, Wes, I said there's one last piece I think I think we need to hit on too, which is the distractions in communications. And we get busy, and I know it's like I'll be working on a presentation on my computer, and then my phone is ringing, and I've got a client who's working on a deal, and we're trying to get an LOI done, and I'm doing all this, and my wife is over here on the side going, "Hey, what are we doing for dinner?" Or there's something, or I need to talk to you about something. And what I've learned over time is I just have to just close this, put my phone on vibrate and put it away. And I got to we literally have to look at her so that she has my attention and I have hers. And so, we talk about communication and the digital world, but there is nothing like personal communication, especially with your loved one or your spouse, because if you don't do that, you're going to miss the boat. And I know from experience that I messed that one up. But you end up having to just, and so Pam and I now, there are times when she says, I need to ask you something. I literally, if I'm facing this way, I will kind of stop what I'm doing, put everything down, and I'll look at her so that I'm listening to what she's saying and I can reply. And so don't let all that other stuff, it's about communication. It's big things, but even down to the little things that I would say, really make sure that you're not letting them get in the way of the things that are important. Family, spouse, happiness, work, success.
Yeah, that's why I call it floating. You just have to learn what matters, and I just kind of float through it. When I see my friends like, "Oh, how are you doing? How's the business?" I'm like, I'm not really thinking about it right now. Don't know. Like, what am I going?
But I would
it's going to be there tomorrow morning.
I would venture, Wes, you're probably wired a lot like me. You're thinking about it a lot. You just give the aura that you're floating.
No, you have to learn though, because even I just had a kid, so now you have to learn to shut it down. Right. And that can be a very hard thing, but you've got to learn to shut down one, what does matter? When can I shut it down? Two, permanently shut down things that don't matter and just distractions. Because, once you do that, it's like, maybe I'm here till 6 or 7. And then this is why I call it floating. I go home, I get some time to think. My alone time is now my car ride home. Right. And then I get home and I've got a 2-month-old.
Yeah, that's it.
So there's no, babies in the hands. Now we're in a whole different world. And, put the baby to bed. I go to bed. I wake up and you do it all again. And once you get the distractions out of the way, it's a beautiful thing and you actually really enjoy it and love it. But if you've got the distractions going on and they're bugging you in your life, it's not going to work. You're not going to be happy. You're going to be, you can't give your full effort to the business and your family and a bunch of crap that doesn't matter.
That's right.
You've got to pick the stuff that matters. And I'm not saying, don't have a personal life, don't do all those things. I'm saying just, you got to narrow it down to what actually matters. Who am I spending my time with? What am I doing? Is this adding value to my life? It's funny, the older you get, your friends start to disappear. I remember this vividly. We're in college and we're at a bar after a golf tournament, or maybe just out of college. And one of my good friends' dads is with us. And, there's like 40 of us playing in the golf tournament. We are down to like 5 of us. And he just looks and he goes, "Guys, I hate to be the bearer of bad news here, but your buddies that didn't go out of their way to be here tonight to spend a couple more hours with you, this is just basically who your friends are going to be for the next 30 years. And he was spot on. It's the same 5 of us.
I can say that 30 years later. Absolutely. And you just don't need you don't need as much. Pam and I talk a lot about it now. It's like, I was never one that was, loved going to parties of 40 couples and all these. That was just never me to a degree. But today it's like my brother my brother came over last night to watch the Super Bowl, another friends, and then my son and his wife and our grandson came over. That was
Great time.
and they left at halftime, so so it was great. But I think we really hit on some really important stuff today of making sure that the world is full of lots of stuff, disruptions, distractions, from financially, spiritually, communication-wise, practice-wise. Just make sure you got to make sure that you're dealing with the stuff that's really important, and I think you hit that right.
Yeah, well, everyone, you basically got to learn, prepare for disruptions. My dad always told me we prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And if you prepare for the worst and hope for the best, you will indeed succeed. You want to be prepared for a financial windfall. It's going to happen. You'll survive it. You'll get through it. But if you live your life on the edge financially, you're not going to get through it. You're going to be stressed out. It's all going to collapse. And the other part is, this is tough when you're on the younger side. Everybody in their 20s thinks, I'm not that far out of my 20s. So, you think one thing's important then, and then you get to your 30s and you start to have kids, and you don't even really care about anything you did in your 20s. Nope. It's the only things that mattered were, hey, did I do the right things to build my career? And I'm happy to say I did do those right things, and I'm in a good spot now. But if you don't do those things in your 20s and you pay too much attention to the distractions, when you get to your 30s and you have to do them and you got mouths to feed, it's not nearly as much fun.
and you probably won't know how to do it.
Right. So take care of the things that matter while you're young. Don't let the other things get to you, and you'll have a very long, successful career if you can get those principles right.
Absolutely. Great advice, and always fun.
Scott, thanks for being here. We'll see you all next episode.
Sounds great.